Welcome to a concert of harpsichord music from the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. My name is Michael Berke, and this is a program that I've entitled Pandemic Pipedreams, and I've called it that for two reasons. The first is that it used to be before the pandemic that I would periodically give harpsichord recitals here in my home. Of course, after the pandemic, I didn't do that. The second reason is that Sheila and I used to go abroad several times a year for trips, and post-pandemic, we haven't traveled. So what I've endeavored to do in this program is to accomplish two things. One is to have a recital, and second is to vicariously travel to Europe through music, hence this program. So we're going to start this musical journey in England with a piece by John Bull. Now, when I say John Bull in England, you might think of John Bull, the character that represents England like Uncle Sam represents the US. But that John Bull wasn't created until the year of 1712. The composer John Bull lived in the 16th century. He was Elizabethan, and it was well before the caricature of John Bull was created. So John Bull, the composer, was a really interesting guy. He was the first person that got a PhD in music from Oxford University, and he was a favorite of Queen Elizabeth. He was a harpsichord virtuoso, and she sent him on various missions around Europe giving concerts. Many historians think, by the way, that he was also a spy on behalf of Queen Elizabeth. After she died, James I came in. He didn't have the same relationship with James I, and it turns out that he fathered a child out of wedlock, and James I was infuriated, and he had the Archbishop of Canterbury seek to prosecute John Bull for adultery. John Bull fled the country and went to Belgium, where he lived the rest of his life. And however, he continued to have a relationship with England, and he would compose music and send the music to England. One of these pieces that I'm going to play for you now is one of those pieces. This piece is called John Bull, a Gigge, John Bull's Myself. Well, what it is a Gigge is a dance, it's a musical dance, and he calls it John Bull's Myself because it's a self-portrait by him of who he is. And so you'll hear from the nature of the music that he was a really fun guy. He had a really good sense of humor. He obviously thought that he was a jolly old fellow and a lot of fun, and it sounds like he would be a good guy to have as a dinner companion. So here's the piece. One other thing I wanted to say before I start, and that is the nature of the harpsichord is that you can't play louder or softer like you can on a piano because of the mechanics of the instrument. So what harpsichord builders did is they would put in mechanisms in the instruments that would alter the color of the sound so that it wouldn't get too boring to hear the same tonality all the time. So my particular instrument has all of those bells and whistles, and during the course of this program I'm going to switch those tonalities so you get to hear the different sounds that the instrument can make. In this piece, I'm going to play it on two manuals. The manual is a keyboard. On the upper manual, I have it set to what's called the nasard, which means a nasal sound. And then the lower manual is set on one string. There's a total of 3 strings in the instrument, and you can engage or disengage them. Well, anyway, for this piece, I'm going to have one string on the bottom keyboard, the nasard on the top keyboard, So here we go, John Bull's Myself. From England, we're going to go to France, and this is 100 years after the time of John Bull. This is the time of Louis XIV and the court at Versailles. One of the principal musicians at that court was François Couperin, who was known by his contemporaries as Le Grand, meaning the Great One. And what he did for Louis XIV is he played for Louis's special gatherings of his intimates, his concubines, his closest friends, in his boudoir and chambers. And he played himself pieces that he wrote for the harpsichord, and he played pieces that were called genre pieces. And what these pieces are is they're musical descriptions of various things. They're descriptions of people, of places, of emotions, of things, and the titles are where you get the idea of what the piece is about, and then you can put your own interpretation on it, of course. I'm going to play two pieces by Couperin. The first piece is called Les Barricades Mysterieuses, which means the mysterious barricades. Now that's a piece that musicologists argue about what it means. Some say that it's a political piece, some people say it's social, some people say it's sexual, talking about the battle of the sexes. But nobody knows for sure. So I'll play the piece and then you can decide for yourself what you think the piece is about. For this purpose, I'm going to play the upper manual on what's called a buff stop, and that's where there's a felt strip that's engaged that gives this harpsichord the sound of a lute, and the bottom keyboard will be on one string. Ready? In the early 18th century, the mechanical clock was invented and became the rage in Europe and especially in France. And this next piece I'm going to play for you is one of those genre pieces by Couperin, and it is called, has two names. It's called the Tic Toc Choc or Les Maillotins. The Tic Toc Choc basically means a tick-tock clock, and Les Maillotins means little hammers, because also what they used to love in the French court were these little music boxes with the little hammers. So Couperin wrote a genre piece describing that tick-tock clock, which hopefully you will hear in this piece. Regarding the setting, I've taken off the buff stop, and I'm going to play it where the treble line will be on the upper keyboard and the bass line will be on the lower keyboard, each keyboard with just one string engaged. From France, we're going to go to Italy, Portugal, and Spain, all with one composer, and that composer is Domenico Scarlatti. He was a contemporary of Couperin. He was born and spent the first part of his life in Italy. Unfortunately for him, his father, Alessandro Scarlatti, was the most famous composer in Italy, and in fact, well known throughout the world. And he was completely dwarfed by his father's fame. So he decided to leave Italy to try and establish his own reputation. And he went to Portugal and got a job as being a harpsichord teacher for Maria Barbara, who was a princess at Portugal court. Well, the princess married the King of Spain, and she became the Queen of Spain and moved to Spain and took Scarlatti with her. And the rest of his life, his entire career, was spent being solely her harpsichord teacher, and he wrote pieces for her to play. And his output consists of 555 pieces for harpsichord written for her to play. She was apparently an amazing musician, because some of these pieces are devilishly difficult, but she can apparently play them because he wrote them for her. One of the things that he liked to do was he apparently went, a lot of free time, he went on walks throughout town, and he soaked up the sights and sounds of Spain. And he incorporated what he saw and heard into his music. And you'll hear in his music sounds of castanets, drums, military bands, flamenco guitars, gypsy singers. His music is very colorful with all of these Spanish elements. All of his pieces, by the way, are called sonata, not like Scarlatti, Couperin, who gave you a clue as to what the sound effects he was attempting to replicate in his music were. Everything by Scarlatti is just called sonata. So you kind of have to decide for yourself what are the sights and sounds that he is creating in that particular piece. The piece that I'm going to play for you, called Sonata, in my mind, the first of it sounds to me like two military trumpets trumpeting the announcement of something. Then the second half, to me, sounds like a flamenco guitar in a bar kind of setup with flamenco dancing. And then it goes back to the military trumpets. And I hope you can, well, maybe you'll hear different things, but that's what I hear. For this piece, the registration is going to be on the lower keyboard. I now have 2 strings engaged, 2 of the 3 strings, and I'm on occasion going to go on the upper manual, which will only have 1 string engaged, so you can hear the tonal difference. From Spain, we're going to go to Germany, and the composer is none other than Johann Sebastian Bach, who many musicologists believe is the greatest composer who ever lived. Bach lived in central Germany, and in one sense he was very provincial, in that he never traveled more than 250 miles farther away from where he was born. However, what he did do is he was insatiably curious about all of the music that was being composed and performed throughout Europe. And he got copies of all of these pieces that were being played from all around Europe. And he absorbed the styles and the different tonalities of these different countries into his own style. The German style, Bach's style, is counterpoint, contrapuntal, which basically means multiple lines of music that sound simultaneously. But what Bach did is he would incorporate within that contrapuntal style, styles of from other countries. For example, he wrote a series of pieces called the French Suites, in which he incorporated the French style. He wrote a series of pieces called the English Suites, with the English style. He wrote the Italian Concerto, with the Italian style. And this piece that I'm going to play for you is called Fantasie. And in that is clearly based upon the Italian style. It has the Italian melodic flair. However, it is grounded in counterpoint, and it is uniquely Bach. For this piece, I'm going to have the lower keyboard on 2 strings and the upper keyboard on 1 string, and I'll be going back and forth, and you'll hear the contrasts. next we're going to stay in Germany, but we're going to go a generation later in time to J.S. Bach's eldest son, that's C.P.E. Bach, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. Now, in Germany, if you had said the composer Bach, people would all think you were talking about C.P.E. and not J.S., because C.P.E. was world-renowned and J.S. was virtually unknown until many years after he died, when he was essentially rediscovered by Mendelssohn and Brahms. But before that, he was known basically as an organ player, and his music was not known. C.P.E., however, had world renown known, as I say, and he lived, as you saw, his lifespan was most of the 18th century. He spanned both the Baroque era and the beginning of the classical era. However, his music doesn't sound Baroque and it doesn't sound classic. What it sounds like is C.P.E. He has his own style, and his style has been described as some musicologists call it the Galant style. Some people call it Rococo. He himself called it Empfindsamer style, which basically means expressive, because his music is noted for abrupt changes in mood. He'll go from major keys to minor, all in a couple of bars and back again. His music is truly unique. He was greatly renowned in his day. He was the court composer for Frederick the Great, and he lived in Berlin at the court of Frederick for many years, and many people called him the Berlin Bach. And then toward the end of his career, he petitioned the king for leave to go to the court of Hamburg, which the king reluctantly agreed to do. And at Hamburg, he became the court composer, and then people started calling him the Hamburg Bach. So if you hear the Berlin Bach or the Hamburg Bach, it's the same guy, it's C.P.E. He was world-renowned, as I've said several times. However, when he died, his music went out of fashion, and it was totally overtaken by the classical style and then the subsequent romantic style. And people today rarely play his music, although his music is wonderful. The piece I'm going to play for you is called Solfeggio, and for those of you who were in chorus in high school, you may remember that the word solfeggio refers to a vocal exercise. And what C.P.E. does in this piece is he emulates for the keyboard what a vocal exercise would be, but in his inimitable style. Even within this short piece, he'll have these major and minor mood changes that you will hear. For this piece also, I'll keep the registration as it was before. On the lower manual, there'll be 2 strings, on the upper manual, the 1. Well, our tour of Europe is concluding, and we're now coming back to the United States. And we're going to hear the music of Scott Joplin. Now, Scott Joplin was born in 1863 in Missouri. And the thing about Scott Joplin is, to me, he is like one of the unsung heroes of American music. The unique thing about American music is jazz. And Scott Joplin is the father of ragtime, upon which jazz developed. He was born in Missouri, and he got a job, he played piano, and he got a job in the Williams Brothers Saloon playing piano on the upper floor, which was a bordello, and it was called the Maple Leaf Club. And guess what? He wrote the Maple Leaf Rag. The Maple Leaf Rag was published, and it was the first piece of published music that sold over 1 million copies. It was the most ever up to that time. His fame started from far and wide. He was known as the Entertainer. That was his nickname. He lived his life. He started to get some fame. He moved to New York. He continued to write rags. And then he later wrote a ragtime opera called Tremonisha, which has been performed by the Metropolitan Opera. Not performed often, but it is still performed. But when he died, his music went out of fashion until 1973, when the movie The Sting came out with Robert Redford and Paul Newman, which used the music of Scott Joplin, particularly The Entertainer and the Maple Leaf Rag. And all of a sudden, there was a renaissance in the interest of ragtime and in Scott Joplin. And his music is now being performed again. Sometimes you'll hear it in concerts as encore pieces. His music is unique, it's fun, it's difficult, it's sophisticated. He was self-taught, and he was a great innovator in American music, and I hope you enjoy it. The piece I'm going to play for you is called the Heliotrope Bouquet. And for this last piece, I'm going to, as it were, pull out all the stops, which is to say, the harpsichord will be at its loudest. It'll have all of the strings attached, and you'll hear the sound of the instrument at its fullest. Well, we're now back to the United States from our virtual tour of Europe. I hope you enjoyed the program, and it's my fervent hope that soon this pandemic will be gone, and the next time I do one of these programs, I'll be able to do it in person. And also, it's my fervent hope that soon Sheila and I will be able to travel again abroad. So until that time, be well, stay well, and thanks for joining.